First up has to be what's happening with kids. As a mom with kids going back to school, I'm nervous, especially with one child who's at heightened risk, who is not old enough to get the vaccine at this point. There have been so many questions about this timeline, but Dr. Anthony Fauci said yesterday that the approval could come as soon as next month. What do you hear happening?
Yeah, Dr. Fauci said on TV that the data would be available in September, and I think that left the impression that the approval could come in September, but his comments weren't that specific. The timeline right now, at least with respect to the Pfizer vaccine, the one I'm more familiar with, as you mentioned, I'm on the board of Pfizer, the data should be available in September and should be submitted to the agency at some point in September. But the application probably isn't going to be submitted until some point in October. Now, if the FDA sticks to its normal timeline in terms of how it reviews these applications, you would expect that review to be a 4 to 6 week review for potentially an emergency use authorization. So that puts you in a timeline where you're late fall, early winter. I think that that's sort of an optimized scenario if everything goes right and this is an accelerated review like the other applications have been. It could be the case that the FDA decides to wait for longer follow-up on the children in the clinical trials so that you get a longer-term view of how they perform over time, a 3 to 6 month follow-up, median follow-up of the kids in the clinical trial. And they've made some indication that they would wait a longer period of time to follow those children. So if in fact that does occur, it pushes out the timeline. Now, I think some of this is going to depend on what unfolds this fall. If we continue to see these accelerating rates of infections in kids, particularly as the Delta variant moves to the Northeast, I think there could be more pressure to try to make an earlier authorization of a vaccine to make it available for children aged 5 to 11. We're talking here about the vaccine for kids aged 5 to 11. The vaccine for kids ages 2 to 5, the data on that won't be submitted till November. So that's further behind. The development on that is further behind. That's a lower dose than the vaccine that's going to be used in children aged 5 to 11.
Here's the question. Obviously, this doesn't present the same risk to all children, but there are children who are at heightened risk, kids with rare genetic diseases, kids who have, asthma or any number of different reasons. And I've been a little surprised last week watching the CDC and the American Association of Pediatricians coming out and saying that basically you can't prescribe this off-label for kids under any measures, which is very different than what we've heard, the talking points to this point, that this is a decision between you and your doctors. If your doctor thinks that you are at an incredibly heightened risk and you're, again, setting it against this backdrop, why would they not be allowed, once they see the phase 3 trial data that comes in from Pfizer and from the others, why would they not be able to make that decision to say it's riskier to be a guinea pig to the Delta variant than it is to be a guinea pig with something we know some of the results?
Yeah, it's unusual to see the CDC be this proactive in effectively threatening doctors about off-label use of a product. I understand them exercising concern in the context of children where the data isn't available publicly, so there's not a lot of information to guide physicians right now. That data will be hopefully available in September, so there'll be more data in potentially the public domain to inform those potential decisions. But they've also taken the same posture with respect to prescribing boosters to an older population where there is a lot of data and where they've already made a policy decision that they're going to be doing that in the fall, where they've also taken steps to effectively threaten physicians in terms of losing certain certifications with the CDC if, in fact, they engage in wholesale off-label use of these products. So that's unusual. You're right. That is very an unusual posture of the CDC to take to try to regulate practice of medicine in that way. I do think that if the data comes out in September and it does look promising with respect to the use of the product in children, there might be a broader debate about whether certain very high-risk kids, the risk-benefit makes sense at that point. But that's going to have to be within the confines of the FDA and CDC making that judgment, because at this point they really have put in place measures that I think are going to restrict the vast majority of doctors from exercising any discretion around the use of this product. And to your point, the reality is that the vaccine that's being developed in children is the same formulation as the vaccine that's being used in adults. It's just a lower dose. So it's effectively the same exact vaccine being used in adults, but just 1/3 of the dose. And so, there is some ability to look at the data you have available in adults and translate that into some assumptions around how it behaves in children, although we assume from a regulatory standpoint that kids under the age of 12 behave differently. The biology is differently, and that's why you want to see separate data, and that's why you reformulate these products for a younger child, because you can't have the expectation that a product that works in adults in one way is going to work in children in the same fashion.